And Chris Pirtle from NBA Insiders joins us here on The Last Word on Sports on SB Nation Radio. Chris, thanks for taking the time out of your busy week to join us, and thanks for coming back on with us.
Hey, you got it. Good to be with you guys tonight.
Absolutely.
Always.
So, Chris, the first question we're going to come up with, or the first question that that we're going to ask you is, with Tony Parker out for the remainder of the playoffs, what player do you see besides Kawhi Leonard that really needs to step up big for San Antonio?
Well, the first answer I want to give you is LaMarcus Aldridge, but I think that kind of goes without saying.
Right.
I think Patty Mills is somebody that needs to step up. We saw the Spurs win the NBA championship just 3 short years ago, and they did it on the strength of excellent field goal percentage shooting, and both Patty Mills and Danny Green had a lot to do with that. So I'm going to give you 2 answers. I'm going to say Patty Mills and Danny Green. Both of those guys need to step it up in the backcourt.
Chris, several teams recently have asked about the availability of the Knicks' Kristaps Porzingis. What is his current trade value, and do you ultimately see the Knicks entertaining any trade offers this offseason?
No, I don't. I think it would be foolish to entertain any trade offers for who is your best player, the player that you're going to build around in the future. Really, the only reason that fans have a reason to buy a ticket these days to go see the New York Knicks is Kristaps Porzingis. Yep. To entertain a deal that would involve trading him would be extremely foolish. But let's remember, this is the New York Knicks. They do foolish things. So it could happen. But I would say his trade value is extremely high. He's going to go into his 3rd year. He was the Rookie of the Year last year. If I'm a team that had a chance to trade for him, I would give the Knicks just about anything they wanted for him. So I think his trade value is extremely high, but the reality of the New York Knicks trading him, I think, wouldn't be a good reality. I don't see that happening.
And again, we're joined by Chris Pirtle of NBA Insiders here on The Last Word on Sports on SB Nation Radio. Chris, I read a headline, and the name of the author of the headline escapes me, and I apologize for that, but it had read that the Utah Jazz were built to beat the Golden State Warriors, but can they? So, Chris, let me ask you, can the Jazz beat the Warriors, and if there's anybody out, is there anybody out there who can?
Well, the only team out there that could beat the Golden State Warriors is the team that beat them last year in the finals. The Jazz being built to beat the Golden State Warriors, unfortunately, I have to laugh when I hear that because if you take the best player on the Utah Jazz, which is probably Gordon Hayward, or you could even say it could be Rudy Gobert, if you put one of those guys on the Golden State Warriors, they wouldn't even be in the top 4 as far as players on that team.
Right.
So I don't know how the Jazz are built to beat the Warriors. I don't think that's going to work out. If anything, the Jazz are going to be lucky to win 1 game this series. And to answer your other question, the only team that is built to beat the Warriors currently is the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Chris, I'm going to give you a list of 4 names here. Tell me which ones are going to be staying and which ones will be gone this offseason. Paul George, Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, and Carmelo Anthony.
Well, I see Paul George leaving. I think he's going to end up in L.A., and he could end up in either team out there. He could end up as a member of the Clippers or the Lakers. I think Blake Griffin is going to leave also. I can see a team like the New York Knicks offering him a max contract and all the spotlight he could possibly want. I think Blake Griffin wants that, and I think Blake Griffin will take that. The other 2 guys you mentioned on that list, Chris Paul, I think he's going to stay in Los Angeles. He's had a great run in Los Angeles, and I think they're going to offer him the $200 million contract. So I think Chris Paul is going to stay. And who is the other person?
Carmelo Anthony.
Carmelo Anthony. Okay, for money reasons, nobody's going to want to take on Carmelo Anthony's contract. I hear so much talk about Carmelo Anthony ending up on a different team. Well, let's remember Carmelo Anthony is due about $60 million over the next 2 years.
Right.
Nobody is going to want to pay that. So I think both Anthony and Paul stay put. And I think Paul George and Blake Griffin go somewhere else this offseason.
And, again, we're joined by Chris Pirtle of NBA Insiders here on The Last Word on Sports on SB Nation Radio. Chris, we'll let you go here with this last question. Doc Rivers came out the other day talking about the legacy of the Los Angeles Clippers. Well, the Clippers really don't have, much of a legacy, but after another early playoff exit, is it time for the Clippers to maybe consider moving on from Doc Rivers? And if they were to make any changes to their roster, other than, as you mentioned, Blake Griffin, who would it be?
Okay, well, for the Clippers, it's a tough one because they've never experienced the success they've experienced until Doc Rivers came to town.
Right.
Let's remember they were the Pacific Division champions 2 consecutive years, just 4 and 5 years ago. So they've never experienced the success they've had until Doc Rivers came to town. However, when you get eliminated in the playoffs 5 straight years and you had the lead in the series, it is time to think about a different roster, and it's time to think about a different coach possibly. So I see the Clippers really trying to make a push to get Paul George. As I mentioned earlier in our segment, I think Paul George wants to go back to L.A. The Clippers obviously are in L.A., and I see them making a huge push to get Paul George. Will that happen? Time will tell, but I think there's going to be a major shakeup in Clipperland this offseason.
Chris, real quick for you, if they do indeed decide and pull the trigger on a Paul George deal, hypothetically speaking, what would need to be included in that trade from a Clippers perspective to acquire PG-13?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Paul George is going to be a free agent this offseason.
Correct. I wasn't sure. Is he restricted or unrestricted?
That I would have to check on.
Okay.
But if he's restricted, they would have to offer. They would actually have to sign one of the players that they have in order to make that happen, possibly a Blake Griffin for Paul George deal.
Okay.
But what I would see the Clippers doing, I think the wise thing for them is to try to get some of these guys to take less money and to try to form a legitimate big three involving Paul George, Blake Griffin, and Chris Paul. Can that happen? It would all depend on whether players will take less money or not.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
It's definitely going to be something we're looking forward to. NBA playoffs in full swing. Chris, I know you're about as excited about it as we are. Thanks for coming on with us, and we look forward to talking to you again soon as the NBA Finals draw ever closer.
You got it. Enjoy
Appreciate
the
it,
action
Chris.
tonight, guys.
Yeah, amazing insight. Appreciate it, as always.